The stage is yours.
Okay. First of all, hammaga salom. Mening ismim Deniz yoki Dengiz. Bugun qatnashayotganingiz uchun katta rahmat. Prezentatsiyam ingliz tilida bo'ladi, chunki men hozir o'zbek tilidagi tibbiy so'zlarni yaxshi tushunmayman. Prezentatsiyadan keyin savollaringizga javob beraman. Faqat hammasini tushunmay olmaysam, Islomjon menga iltimos yordam berasiz. Agar hammamiz tayyor bo'lsak, men boshlayman. Hozir ingliz tilida gapiraman. I'm a bit nervous, but today we'll be talking about cancer. It's a very big topic. We all know about it. We all know someone who's sick of cancer, who unfortunately died of cancer. So today I would like to kind of briefly talk about what it is, right, and ways to prevent it. So here are the topics we're going to go through today. We'll talk about me a little bit. We'll dive into some statistics, some key terminology that are used in the field. We'll talk about how cancer is formed and developed. We will talk about my PhD topic, which is genetic toxicology, particularly energy metabolism as a biomarker. And then we will also talk about some clinical insights of preventative measures and screening for cancer. And at the end, I will give you a couple of advices that I have for this field. So first, let's talk a little bit about me so you actually understand why I'm here talking about cancer. I was born and raised in Uzbekistan. I graduated high school in 2018 and moved straight to London to pursue a bachelor's in biomedical sciences genetic. I studied 4 years in university. I attended Brunel University London. So 2 years I studied, 1 year I worked, and then returned back to uni to finish. That's actually something universities in the UK offer. So you get an experience of 1 year to work. So from Brunel University London, I managed to get 2 of my very notable awards. Top Student Award for finishing the top of my class, and Top Project Award, which I've gotten for my final year project focusing on osteosarcoma and preventative measures, possible new ways to treat it. And both of these awards were given to me by the Royal Society of Biology. So while I was still in uni, I did a lot of internships because, as you know, this field is very big. So I wanted to try different things to actually see what interests me the most. And I interned in Uzbekistan, in Turkey, as well as in the UK. And in the UK, I actually managed to get a job in a very big pharmaceutical company. Some of you may know GSK. And there I worked in their genetic toxicology department. And then when I went on to a conference to present my work, I also won an award there for all the work I did and got an offer to do a PhD. So basically, I do not have a master's. So straight from bachelor's, I got a PhD offer, and now that's what I'm doing. So before I move on to my PhD, I wanted to say that my last internship was in Uzbekistan in the Republican Cancer Center, where I worked with 2 of the leading oncologists focusing on cervical cancer. And I wrote a paper with them where we talked about the new diagnostics. So you can read about it online. It's a very interesting paper. And I also wrote a paper on skin cancer, particularly how the use of UV nail lamps, you know, we girls like getting our nails done, how they could potentially alter our cells and lead to harmful effects. And right now I am on my 7th month of PhD in Swansea University. So now I would like to talk to you about cancer statistics. I know this is a very overwhelming slide, but what I really wanted to show you with this is cancer is not a secret, right? We know it exists. I just wanted you to understand that in Uzbekistan, a lot of people do also suffer from cancer. And I wanted to bring this table to show you which cancers are most common in our country so that you will look at it and start asking questions like, why is this the case? Why is this happening? And when you understand that, you will start also thinking in how to protect yourself and your family. And when we look at the world, we can see that there are some differences. And this is also here for you to understand that not all cancer cases are the same around the world. It depends on the region, right? And it all depends on the certain risk factors, such as access to healthcare, access to medication, or for example, if certain country tends to drink esophageal cancer, liver cancer, then the country who kind of stays away from alcohol. So I will go through some of the key terminology, which I think is important to understand. And I'm pretty sure all of you, if not most of you, are familiar with these terms. So first of all is DNA. And what is DNA? DNA is the genetic material that is found in all of our cells. It contains basically instructions that makes us who we are, right? It's very important for us. So DNA, think of it as a manual. And this manual is written using 4 letters, G, C, A, and T. So just these 4 letters, but in different orders. So it's important for you to understand that our DNA is very big. This molecule is about 3 billion of these letters long, right? And what's a very interesting fact that I always like to tell people is that my DNA and your DNA is 99.9% identical, you know, but that 0.1% is actually what makes us look different and what makes all of us unique, which I think is very cool. So when we talk about DNA, we also have to talk about genes, and genes are basically just units of DNA. So there are a number of these letters, you know, in order that make up genes. And these genes then become specific, like encode specific proteins that are basically important for every process in our body. And another fun fact is that in human body, we have over 25,000 genes that we know of, but there might be some more. There are some that are not yet, have yet been discovered. So when we talk about genes, when we start talking about cancer, we have to understand mutations. And what are mutations? Mutations are simply just changes in our DNA that lead to cells becoming abnormal. And for you to understand more about what mutations are, I created this slide. Looks very complicated, but I'll just try to explain it. So mutations can be very small or very large, right? So I just wanted to point out to something called a point mutation, which is a change of just this one letter in that 3 billion letter worth of sequence, right? Just one letter changes. You might think that's not going to make a big difference, right? But if it happens to a specific gene, that actually has a drastic effect on the body. For example, in the case of sickle cell anemia, just a change from the letter A to T in the HBB gene results in an abnormal protein, in this case hemoglobin, that causes the red blood cells to become moon-like shaped, so they won't be able to carry oxygen, and that leads to the person having to live with anemia. Sickle cell anemia can also be a very life-threatening condition. Then we move on to large deletions or insertions. These can be as small as, you know, just one of these letters being deleted or inserted, or like a bunch of these letters being deleted. So in the case of Duchenne muscular dystrophy, which is a rare genetic condition, some deletions happen in the DMD gene, which encodes a protein called dystrophin. And this protein is important for our muscles. So this mutation, when it happens in a human body, it results to progressive muscle weakness and degeneration, meaning that the person, as he starts growing, loses his ability to use, you know, the muscles. So at a certain age, the person will not even be able to eat by himself. So why am I bringing this here? I just wanted you to understand that mutations happen in the body at all times. It's these mutations that happen in specific genes that we should be more kind of cautious about. I also wanted to bring another example, which is not a mutation, but also an abnormality that happens in the body, especially when we talk about cancer, is whole chromosome loss or gain. And I wanted to bring the example of Down syndrome because I think we all know, we all saw kids that have Down syndrome. It's an easier example to use. So as you know, people, we have 23 sets of chromosomes, meaning 46, you know, chromosomes individually. So people with Down syndrome gain an extra chromosome, and that happens due to like external factors, you know, as well as genetic mutations in the body. But what I want to say is that any abnormality, if it happens to a specific chromosome or a gene, can have drastic effects on the human body. So just to quickly go back and talk about genotoxicity. Genotoxicity is basically the ability of certain substances to cause damage to our DNA. Substances can be, for example, tobacco, how smoke can damage the DNA. And then when we talk about genotoxicity, we have to also acknowledge carcinogens. And these are substances that are proven to be causing cancer. Another, as an example, tobacco is a carcinogen because it has links to causing lung cancer. So then we have tumors. And a lot of people think tumors as being cancer, which is a kind of a misunderstanding because tumors can be benign, meaning that they're not cancerous, and malignant, which means that they are cancerous. Benign tumors are very easy to treat and they can be removed easily. Malignant are a little bit harder to treat. Cancer is just basically a disease where cells start to act and grow abnormally, and metastasis, as you all know, is the spread of cancer from a primary location to a secondary. Here, with this diagram, what I wanted to show you is that DNA is very important. So to have a healthy DNA eventually brings us to proteins, right? So we have healthy proteins, and proteins are responsible for all sorts of things around the body, starting from structural to movement. They act as enzymes, they protect us as antibodies, they are hormones, so they are very important, which is why it's very important to have a good and a healthy DNA. So now let's briefly just talk about what is cancer. So as I mentioned before, cancer is a disease where the cells in our body, they start growing uncontrollably and spread to different parts of the body. Cancer can start technically anywhere in the body because we are all made up of trillions of cells. What I wanted to explain to you is that normally in a human body, when our cells die or when we have an injury, our other cells, they start to divide to kind of compensate to that, right? But they know when to stop. When it comes to cancer cells, they don't know that. So they constantly keep on growing and forming this big tumor, in the body. And the thing about cancer is that once the cells grow, they also acquire specific mutations that make them so dangerous. So in order to understand how cancer is formed, we need to look at how mutations happen in the body. So I brought a couple of examples how this can happen, how our genetic material, so DNA, can be altered. So as I said before, our cells grow and replenish the dead cells, right? So we need to understand that in order for our cells to divide, they need to copy the DNA. So all these 3 billion nucleotides, they need to copy that to put it in the new cell, right, to pass it on. But you can imagine if you've been told to just copy the 3 billion letters, even on your computer, at some point you will make an error, right? You will accidentally put a different letter. This happens, but our body is so smart that it detects that and changes it back to the healthy version, to the correct version. Now that happens in healthy cells. But imagine if you're supposed to copy this 3 billion, let's just say sentence of 3 billion letters, maybe like 5-6 times more, because cancer cells, they grow very fast. You will make more errors. And that's what makes cancer cells so dangerous, is because they divide so fast, they have a lot of errors there, and our cells, they cannot fix it. So eventually what you have is a bunch of cells with a lot of mutations. And that's how cancer cells become very hard to treat, because all the time, every time they divide, they can introduce new mutations. Another thing is that our DNA can be damaged as a result of certain harmful substances, such as, things that are found in the environment. One of them being UV light from the sun. It has a direct impact on our DNA, as well as tobacco smoke, as I mentioned before. So you can see on the diagram here an example of UV light. So UV light enters and damages directly our DNA. And you can see before the DNA is intact and after it's not intact. And as I said before, if it happens to a specific gene, then that can already initiate cancer. When in the case of UV radiation, that is linked to melanoma, so skin cancer. And the last thing how cancer can be formed is because of inherited mutations from our parents. Now, I want you to think, if in your family you have certain cancers that are appearing, from generation to generation, now that might mean that you have a bad copy of a gene that is mutated, that has been passed on from generation to generation. So here, I just wanted to mention and show you how exactly cancer is developed. So as I said before, cancer starts from a single mutation. So one mutation, so all the cells are healthy, one cell acquires a mutation, and then it starts to grow. And as it grows, it acquires more mutations, and then it becomes this big lump of tumor that can potentially detach and metastasize to different locations, which we'll be talking about here. So the thing you have to understand about metastasis is that when the tumor is too big, right, some of the cells start to detach. And when they detach, majority of them die because it's very hard to survive on your own. But some of them manage to get to our blood vessels and travel all around to other organs. And once they attach to other organs, they start to form a secondary tumor, which is very hard to treat, as you may know. So now, kind of moving away from cancer, I will talk a little bit about my PhD topic, which has obviously links to understanding cancer more. So I work in the genetic toxicology field, and genetic toxicology is basically the study where we assess the potential or the ability of certain agents to induce genetic mutation or chromosomal damage, right? So genetic toxicology is actually used by pharmaceutical companies, cosmetology companies, everything before releasing a new product, because we need to test if the product we are releasing is safe. Genetic toxicology is also important because, as you know, in the environment we live in, there are certain contaminants or certain toxins that can also result in mutation and cancer. The thing about genetic toxicology you have to understand is we do this because it's important to understand that one toxin causing one mutation can start the initiation of a disease. So that's very important, such as in the terms of cancer, one potential mutation can start the whole process of cancer. So genetic toxicology uses three means of testing. In silico, where we look at already existed information from, online sources and try to predict if the certain chemical is carcinogenic or genotoxic. In vitro, where we use bacteria or where we use simpler organisms to test. And then in vivo is actually when we conduct animal studies that closely mimic humans. So what I am doing is I'm looking at energy metabolism, and don't let this diagram scare you because I'm not going to obviously talk about it. It's a bit too long to delve into that. But just to make you understand, energy metabolism is a set of reactions that use, let's just say, glucose to produce energy. And energy is important to us because we need energy to grow, to function, and to repair our cells. Now, when I said to you before, so when cells divide, right? Healthy cells, they need energy. Cancer cells also need energy when they divide, but they need more energy than healthy cells because they divide at such a high rate. So understanding that, we want to look at normal cells compared to cancer cells and see these differences in their metabolic profiles and see if there's something that stands out so much that we can use that to detect cancer at an early stage. Because obviously when cancer progresses, it needs more and more energy. So that's like a clear difference between a healthy cell and a cancer cell. So my project, I focus on 3 known carcinogens because obviously before I validate an assay, I need to make sure that the compounds I use cause cancer. So I can clearly see cancer and non-cancer. So I'll be using 3 dietary carcinogens that are found in foods that we most of us eat on a daily basis in 5 cell lines. 4 of these cell lines are gastrointestinal cell lines, and this is actually linked to Uzbekistan because in 2022 in Uzbekistan, stomach cancer was the most lethal cancer. So actually survival rates are not that great if you have, late stages of stomach cancer. So with my PhD, what I wanted to do is I wanted to also see if the foods we eat, like barbecued meat and all that, potentially impacts our gastrointestinal cells. And if it does, then that will be a warning sign to maybe look at what we eat and try to limit our exposures to certain foods. So all of the cell lines I picked, I summarized them in this diagram. You can see that they come from different areas of the gastrointestinal tract. So that will be interesting to see how they impact each and every organ. And I'll be using these assays. They look a bit complicated, but I'll just briefly state what they do. So the one on the right is the micronucleus assay. It basically tests for any damage to the DNA. The other 2 are metabolism assay. They will clearly show me the difference in a healthy cell and an unhealthy cell. And the goals of my project is basically to identify a novel biomarker to detect cancer at an early stage. And then we'll use these biomarkers to also detect potential chemical agents that are carcinogens. I also want to add some knowledge and evaluate if there's a risk between the food we consume and cancer, basically. So now I wanted to briefly talk to you about the most interesting thing, I think, is the clinical insight and how we can protect ourselves from cancer. So I wrote down the most common preventative measures from cancer. Now, I'm not going to go through all of them because I've already created a summary text for all of you to have it, and it's in Uzbek. But what I wanted to point out here is that you need to live a healthy lifestyle to prevent the basically formation of cancer. You need to know how to protect yourself. It's important to follow these steps because they will minimize your risk in getting cancer. Now, I want to just reiterate that it does not mean that if you consume alcohol or if you stay at the sun or go out, you will have cancer. Because as I said before, our cells still, they manage to deal with any mutations that happen. It's the prolonged exposure that's very harmful. For example, going out in the sun right now will not cause anything to me. But I also have to understand that me going out to the sun for years, that long exposure is a little bit dangerous. So try to protect yourself by, applying sunscreen. And I think the most important thing I always tell to people who ask me how to protect themselves from cancer is to get tests regularly. And the question that I ask afterwards is, I've been asked afterwards, is when to get tested, at what age? So thankfully, for years, there have been research published on certain cancers linked to certain age groups. So I created this diagram to show you that when specifically you need to start getting tested. So from the age 25 to 39, you have to get tested for cervical cancer for women. After the age of 40, we add on breast cancer, colorectal, and prostate. Prostate, obviously for men. After the age of 50, we also add in lung cancer. Now, this is available for general public. If you don't have any symptoms or cancer does not run in your family, that's when you need to get tested, right? However, I also included a diagram where I talk about certain signs or symptoms that you might have when you have to go and get checked by the doctor. So I will also have this sent to you, so you have it written down in Uzbek. The thing you need to understand is, with cancer, it's very important to get an early diagnosis, because the earlier you're diagnosed, the better the chances of survival. Here, I included a couple of screening options for you because not a lot of people know how the whole process goes. Different types of cancer have different types of screening options. For example, for breast cancer, you get a mammography. For cervical cancer, to test for HPV, which causes cervical cancer, you get cytology test and a PCR test. But what I really wanted to talk about here is what's happening in science right now. Something called liquid biopsies are coming up. And what liquid biopsies are is basically you come in the hospital, they take your blood, and they extract tumor DNA or tumor cells from your blood. Because as I said before, when tumor is growing, some cells manage to kind of fall out of it and circulate in our blood vessels. And once blood is taken and we isolate tumor cells and tumor DNA, we can sequence it and tell you exactly which mutations you have. And with that, we can tailor a treatment for you that will be much more, beneficial and will increase your rates of survival. Another thing that I want to talk about, which is one of the last things, is the importance of genetic testing. So genetic testing is basically when doctors take your DNA, isolate it, and sequence it, and they can tell you which genes you have that are mutated. There's something called an oncopanel, where you go to a doctor and they take your DNA to specifically check for certain genes that are related to specific cancers. So here I included majority of them. So all of these genes are linked to, for example, breast cancer, right? So when you go and get your genetic testing done, doctors can tell you, yes, you are healthy, your genes are not mutated, it's fine. Or they can tell you, okay, yes, you have one of these genes mutated. Now, that does not mean that you will have cancer. That only means that you have a higher risk of developing cancer, but does not mean that you will 100% have it. It only means, once again, that you have a higher risk. So don't be alarmed, don't be scared. It's just good to know in order to start thinking of ways how to prevent it. And before I finish, I would like to offer some, personal experience in entering this field, some things that really helped me. I understand that science is a very scary field, especially, when you try to work with something that impacts so many people, such as cancer. So don't be scared and do not doubt yourself. Research can be very intensive and difficult, but you have to understand that even a failed experiment adds something new, and knowledge is always important. Try to always say yes to any and all opportunities because of something called transferable skills. These skills, basically, if you do something that's not related to science, that you can take on and then kind of include it in your education or in your future career. Networking is very important. Meeting people using social media, Twitter, LinkedIn is important, but also try to go to different conferences. In Uzbekistan, I've attended over 5 last year. They are there. You just need to search for them. Prepare to work really hard. Prepare to put in extra amount of hours, and always try to go back and ask yourself, what drives me studying this subject? Why am I in this field? For me, it's because I lost my grandparents to cancer, and I promised them that if I won't be able to help them, I will at least help other people. So that's why I'm here, and hopefully that will come true. But you have to find that unique answer within you. And if you have any questions, I'll be here to answer them. If I don't know the answer, you can always reach out to me on Twitter, and I will do my best to research and get back to you. So yeah.
Oh, thank you very much, Deniz. It was very nice to learn and actually to listen you. And it was kind of very quick. I don't know, maybe I kind of why it was quick. Maybe it was very interesting. Usually interesting things pass through very quickly. Well,
thank you. Sorry, I'm a bit nervous, but I hope it was beneficial for people. And as I said before, I did translate everything to Uzbek. It will be available. And you can always pass it on to your friends and family because these things are important to know so we can start protecting ourselves earlier,
Yeah, definitely. So if we move to Q&A session, so maybe I have many questions, but let's first ask, let me actually start. So in your genetic toxicology, you mentioned that you are studying 3 chemicals which lead to development of cancer. I'm wondering what's the mechanism behind that induction of formation of tumor cells with those specific chemicals?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So as I said before, I'm working with 3 chemicals. So that's benzoate-pyrene, IQ, and acrylamide. So benzoate-pyrene and IQ are formed when we process meat at a very high temperature. So for example, when you're grilling in open fire, that heat has a lot of processes that happen within the meat that actually results in the formation of these chemicals. Acrylamide is formed when we toast the bread and it becomes very dark. That's acrylamide forming. That's why they say do not eat bread when it's like burnt. It's bad. So all of these chemicals, that's how they're formed.
Uzbekistan, right? Because we consume bread from tandoor, and usually it always has this burnt regions part, and some of us may not notice or pay attention for that.
Yeah, and we love it. We think it's tasty as well. But that's the thing that people ask me. They're like, should we stop eating plov? Should we stop eating naan? And the question is that no, please eat it, enjoy it. It's the amount you eat it. Not every day. Maybe you have to eat it every other day. That's what matters. So the thing about these chemicals is when you ingest the food, right, everything is broken down in our system. So there are a couple of enzymes that metabolize these chemicals and make them either detoxify them, so help them get eliminated from the body, but a small percentage of them bind to our DNA and cause mutations. So that's what happens. And as I said before, our cells, they manage to fight it off. They manage to bring back the healthy copy of the DNA. But that doesn't always happen because if you keep on eating, more toxins are in the body, more damage can happen. So cells cannot cope with that.
Well, definitely. Also, acrylamide, we use it in a gel to make a gel in the lab, right? For SDS page. Yes. So is it the same acrylamide you mentioned?
Yeah, so acrylamide, as you know, I use acrylamide that's like a powder version. So they isolate it, right? They synthesize the chemical. So, and if you notice in the things we work in the lab, it says like possible carcinogen, wear gloves, wear extra protection. So
yeah. Okay, then we have to pay more attention to the chemicals we are using.
yeah.
Okay, if anyone else, okay. Kimni savoli bo'lsa, marhamat Denizga savol berishlari mumkin. Qo'l ko'tarsalar, mikrofonlaringni yoqib. Begdod aka has question. Begdodaki mikrofoningizni yoqdim. Ovoz eshitilmayapti lekin Begdod aka hozircha.
Maybe if you can write the question in the like a comment under the Telegram.
Yes, we can do that. Okay, maybe he will just write his question. Also, another thing I want to ask, you mentioned you did an internship in Uzbekistan. I was actually surprised. I didn't know that it's possible to do internships in Uzbekistan. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience? What you actually done?
So I started working, like interning at the age of 18. My first one was in a genetics laboratory where we looked at people who have the Philadelphia chromosomes that leads to chronic myeloid leukemia. So mostly kids with leukemias. I was working in the lab to diagnose, people come give blood and then we diagnose whether or not they have it or not. That was quite interesting. And then I moved on to work in Nobel Pharmasanoat, this pharmaceutical company. Yeah, so I worked there and I was looking at the whole process of how they create and synthesize the chemical and then how they start selling it in the market, which was very interesting. Another thing that I did in Uzbekistan was in the Republican Cancer Center, which was last summer, which I think was a very important internship because I also I also went in surgeries to actually see how the whole process happens in Uzbekistan. And from there, actually, I learned the importance of telling people not to be scared to get tested because, we are humans. We always think this is not going to happen to me, right? If it happens to our neighbor, it's not going to happen to us. But we have to understand that it can potentially. So before it reaches that point, let's just go get tested. Let's just give that extra hour in the day, get tested, and, feel relieved that we don't have it. So
the last point, actually, for example, there is no statistical data or any information when I search online about cancer rates in Uzbekistan. So I don't know what type of cancer is the most prevalent one, or which one should we be more aware of. For other countries, it's mostly available. For example, for European or Western countries, but their genetic profile has some differences compared to Central Asian genetic profiles. So certain diseases occur less common in Central Asia, in Uzbekistan, or certain diseases occur much more frequent than in other countries.
Yeah.
Do you know what can be the reason behind it? Is it something people don't share or people just hide?
So when it comes to statistics in our country, I also have hard times figuring out or finding out what we have, which might be because people, it's ethics. People do not maybe want to share what disease they have. So obviously, if people don't share, we cannot gather that statistics. In the UK or in Europe, people are more open about it. You know, every time you're diagnosed, it gets in the system, and then the statistics get published. The reason for such differences in, you know, in Uzbekistan or maybe, you know, Kazakhstan, Turkey, you know, countries like that to Europe is also based on diet, alcohol consumption. So I mean, I don't want to sound a bit biased, but like in Europe, a lot of people or in the UK, a lot of people consume alcohol, and alcohol is a risk factor. It's a carcinogen. You know, it impacts your esophagus, liver. In Uzbekistan, stomach cancer is quite high, and that's because, you know, we love our food. We love to eat certain foods that can potentially have some sort of chemicals in them. We have, like, you know, in the world, high cases of melanoma, which is skin cancer, and it's usually seen in countries that have a very high sun exposure, because we go out, we don't protect ourselves, we don't wear sunscreen, we're always in the sun, right? That's a risk factor. So it all depends on how we live our lives, and, you know, different things that are unique to each country.
I see. Thank you. And Begisteke, foundation.
Ovozim eshitilyaptimi? Assalomu alaykum.
Eshitilyapti.
Uzr, mikrofonim ishlamay qoldi. Rahmat ma'ruza uchun. Men inglizchada hozir ayta olmayman, praktikam kamroq, shuning uchun osonroq o'zbek tilida aytaman. Va hozir 3 ta kimyoviy moddani aytdilar, it's like factor bo'lishi.
If there's difficulties, I can always like leave my Twitter account, because that's where a lot of people like reach out and ask questions in private. That's a possibility as well.
Yeah, he'll just ask in Uzbek. I will translate it.
Yeah, of course.
Masalan, endi tushunamiz. Masalan, xo'p, akrilamid, alanin yo laktatlardan hosil bo'lishi mumkin va uni rolini o'rganish haqiqatda qiziq. Masalan, biz O'zbekiston xalqida keng tarqalgan zararli odatlardan biri nosvoy chekish haqiqatda. Bu haligacha katta sotsial muammo hisoblanadi. Uni men haqiqatda staj o'qimaganman. Qanaqa kanserogen roli bor, lekin o'sha oshqozon, qizillo'ngach, saraton haqiqatda bizda ko'p. Statistik ma'lumotlarni aniq ayta olmayman, lekin juda keng tarqalgan. Shulardan bittasi shunga tegishli bo'lishi mumkin. Bu g'oya balki keyinchalik hozir PhD temalarida bu moddalarni ko'rib chiqsa, balki agar Markaziy Osiyo bilan shug'ullansalar, buni tarkibini o'zgarishi ham bir qiziq g'oya bo'lishi mumkin. Taklif sifatida aytmoqchiman, обсуждение uchun bir qanaqadir masala. Ikkinchisi, o'zim uchun qiziqqan savol, mana ultrafiolet nurlar, ya'ni yuqori energiyali elektromagnit to'lqinlar DNKda mutatsiyalar chaqirishi mumkin, buni hammamiz bilamiz. Lekin kuchli elektromagnit maydon, masalan, mutatsiyalar chaqirishi mumkinmi? Qanaqa qilib mitozni boshqarishi yoki izdan chiqarishi mumkin? U haqida qanaqa informatsiya bormi yoki tekshiruvlar ketyapti? Bu men uchun shaxsan qiziq. Nimaga? Chunki men e'tibor berganman, kuchli elektromagnit maydon bor joyda, ya'ni mana bizda yuqori voltajli tok anaqalari o'tadi-ku, ta'minotlari. O'sha joyda daraxtlarni shoxlari o'smay qoladi-da. Ya'ni elektromagnit maydon o'sayotgan o'simlik hujayralarini to'xtatib qo'yadi. Masalan, shunaqa xususiyat hayvon hujayralari tekshirilmagan. Ikkinchi savolim shu. Rahmat e'tibor uchun.
Rahmat sizga. Hop, should I translate it, Deniz?
I didn't hear anything, that's the thing.
Really?
That's why I was a bit like, yeah.
Okay. Nimagadir Denizga eshitilmabdi, lekin menga eshitildi. So he asked 2 questions. One of them was about, he was just curious to ask if, you know, there is very bad habits among Uzbek men. They try to use some drugs made of plants. It's called nosvoy. If you ever heard of those green small particles. So do you think, or is like just as an idea, they may have potential to be carcinogenic? And do you know anything related to that?
I know.
The first question.
Okay, should I just answer this?
Yeah.
Regarding Nasvai, I did hear about it before. There are a couple of papers published when it comes to like, I think the use of it is more prevalent in our countries. I cannot certainly say that, yes, they are dangerous, but once again, you have to understand any sort of, it's like a tobacco, right? Essentially, it gives like any sort of tobacco dependent product has the tendency of become, I wouldn't say carcinogenic, I don't want to scare people, but dangerous if you do it prolonged exposure. That can particularly be linked to maybe cancers in, the mouth region, tongue.
Right.
For example, now I can say that, the vapes that people smoke,
Yeah.
they are linked a lot with like tongue and, cancer in later stages of life. So cigarettes are linked as well, as you know. So Nasvai, I can be confident in saying that potentially long-term exposure is not a good thing. So try to minimize the use of it.
Or just don't use it.
Or just don't use it.
Yeah, was one like he just proposed maybe this would be also a good option to make a research about, since we are focusing on the Central Asian countries, especially in Uzbekistan. It's a very common practice.
Yeah.
And also having some good data sources regarding its negative aspects maybe could affect people to give up this habit.
Yeah. I think just one thing I want to add, sorry to cut you, but it's also important to understand that as individuals, we are very different. So let's just say if I'll use the example of smoking, right? If I smoke a cigarette the same time as you do, for example, we smoke for 10 years, I might develop cancer and you might not. And it all because I acquired mutations. I already had mutations passed on from my family. That plays the difference, So we also need to be mindful of that just because someone got cancer from that does not mean I will get it too. That's why get a genetic test done to understand what your genes are and if you have any mutations or not.
Yeah, definitely, sure. And the second question he asked was actually quite interesting. If you have ever noticed in Uzbekistan, those wires that conduct electricity at high rates, and when they are like established on the ground and you can directly see them, usually next to them there are some trees growing, and the regions of tree leaves which are exposed to those wires tend to stop growing and tend to die. So he asked if there is any linkage between this high electromagnetic waves that may affect cell development or cell cycle, or maybe somehow inhibit cell cycle stages, which will stop their growth.
Yeah, that's a good question because I'm obviously not an expert in that, but I can say it's a link to radiation, right? Essentially, they irradiate different wavelengths. So certain wavelengths have, as you know, tendency to be carcinogenic or result in some abnormality in cellular processes. So everything once again goes to the damage in our DNA. So some, like when, let's just say, I will use the example of UV because that's the one I wrote a paper on. I'm more familiar and I can be certain of the information I'm giving you is correct. For example, UV light directly, it's also like, type of radiation, directly manages to mutate your DNA. So it gets directly in our cells, mutate the DNA. Now, some of them, there are some mutations that cause abnormalities in different genes responsible for different processes. Some genes produce proteins that are responsible for protecting us from, cell death, or that are responsible for repairing our cells, right? So they're all responsible for different things. So obviously, if there is any sort of radiation that impacts our DNA or cells directly, some of the cells, in order to preserve the remaining, like, the whole tree or, the leaves, they tend to die. So they tend to just sacrifice themselves to make sure the other thing survives, if that kind of makes sense. Because we obviously want to preserve a good intact DNA. The whole idea of us is to pass on a well-functioning, a preserved DNA molecule, because everything stems back to DNA. An intact DNA molecule gives intact, genes give intact proteins, and proteins are why we are what we are. And if something goes abnormal there in any way, that gives like a sboy system, if that's a good way of saying it, which essentially makes some cells sacrifice themselves to just die to preserve the rest of the organism.
I see. Okay, thank you very much. Boshqa savollar yana ishtirokchilarimizdan bo'lsa marhamat, qo'llaringni ko'tarib so'rashlaring mumkin. Also, Deniz, what are your plans after completing your PhD? Are you considering to come back, or what are your career plans in general?
So 100% I will come back to Uzbekistan. That's my dream. I want to come back. I want to, the knowledge I gained from all of my internships, from my education, I want to bring back to Uzbekistan, because I think we have so many talented people, and if we all come together, we can make very big differences in our healthcare. We can help a lot of people. So that's one of my dreams, to come back and essentially help people. Hopefully, yeah.
Are you considering to continue the research or in some other fields?
So research is very hard. So I get very tired, but obviously I would want to continue my research, and I don't think doing research and at the same time being in the clinical, with genetic consulting and all, kind of could potentially happen at the same time. So I hope to add some more knowledge with my current research to basically to see whether or not the foods we eat have any sort of connection to stomach cancer, and after that, anything I can do in Uzbekistan that will help our people, I think will be good enough for me.
Yeah, definitely. It's actually, as you also mentioned, there are many talented people in Uzbekistan, and most of us, we just, me as well, like we don't know what kind of possible career opportunities in the field of biomedical sciences. And one of our goals actually to conduct such meetings with you right now, as we are doing right now, is to promote and try to explain and show that they are not necessarily have to continue in medicine and become a doctor or physicians, but they can also pursue research fields and contribute from another point, which may, and especially right now, has a lot of demands.
That's very true, because there is a misconception that people, want you to become a doctor, but when you get a PhD, you also technically become a doctor, right? Obviously, the doctors, surgeons, and doctors in hospitals, they play a very big role. But I think it's also important to look at the other spectrum of it, actually try to understand on the, genetic level, why do certain diseases happen? How can we prevent it? That's also important. So I think when, doctors such as surgeons and researchers come together and we have that connection between the two, we can maybe give more good, right? We can maybe try to speed up the process of helping people. So that's kind of also the link I want to make.
Yeah, very good goal. I wish we can combine our strengths and knowledge to build a better healthcare system in Uzbekistan. So then it will be our last call for questions. Agar kimdirda savol bo'lsa, marhamat, bo'lmasam, sekin suhbatimizni yakunlaymiz. Okay, then I will share your contacts with our followers. Maybe they may ask your questions directly. If you'd like to. Deniz, thank you very much. I really appreciate that you came and gave us this very important talk. I hope someday we can also organize much bigger scale conferences in Uzbekistan and explain and increase the awareness of population regarding the cancer and related diseases. I hope we will keep in touch, and in the future, maybe we came across and work together.
So hopefully I'll be very happy. Yeah, thank you for having me. Yeah, you will pass on my contact information. I will, if you have any questions, please let me know. I will answer them, like, you know, Russian, Turkish, or Uzbek, English, of course. Just ask, don't be scared. Like, I am learning just as, you know, as most of you are. I'm not an expert, but with everything I have and everything I know, I try to share it with people, and they can then go on and do more research for themselves. Obviously, we have the summary document in Uzbek provided, which I would assume you will share in the Telegram channel. And yeah, I hope this was beneficial to people, and thank you so much. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Have a good day. See you. Take care. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye.